Welcome back, everyone. Throughout this week, we've explored how leaders behave, how they adapt to different situations, how they respond during critical incidents, and how they make ethical decisions. Today, we're going to examine one of the greatest challenges every leader eventually faces: leading organizational change. Whether you're implementing new technology, responding to new legislation, changing department policy, or improving organizational culture, one thing is certain: change is inevitable. The question isn't whether change will happen, though. The question is whether you can lead people through it successfully. Today's lesson is about helping people move from resistance to commitment. Here is our opening scenario. Imagine you're the captain in a police department. Your agency has just announced that every patrol officer will begin wearing body-worn cameras next month. Some officers welcome the change. Others believe cameras will improve transparency and strengthen public trust. But not everyone agrees. Some officers worry this will be used to second-guess their decisions. Others believe the cameras demonstrate a lack of trust from leadership. Almost immediately, resistance begins. As the leader, how do you respond? Do you simply order everyone to comply? Or do you help your employees understand why the change is necessary? And that is what today's lecture is all about. So we're going to reflect on our learning objectives, like usual. By the end of today's lesson, you'll be able to explain why organizational change is often difficult, identify common sources of resistance, apply leadership strategies that encourage commitment, and evaluate organizational change with criminal justice agencies. These skills are essential because every supervisor eventually becomes a change leader. One of the biggest misconceptions about leadership is that people naturally resist change. In reality, most people don't resist change itself. They resist uncertainty, they worry about losing control, they fear making mistakes. They wonder whether they'll be successful under new expectations. Some worry they'll lose status or influence. Others simply feel comfortable with familiar routines. As leaders, we recognize that those concerns are normal. Resistance doesn't automatically mean someone is being difficult. Often, it means they're anxious about the future. What is your role as the leader in change? The leader's responsibility during change isn't simply announcing a new policy. Leadership means helping people move from uncertainty towards confidence. Think of change as a journey. People often begin with fear. Through communication and support, they develop understanding. Eventually, understanding becomes commitment. Great leaders don't force commitment. They earn it by helping people understand the purpose behind the change. And here's the reality: change is already here because criminal justice agencies constantly evolve. Think about the changes that we've seen over the past decade: body-worn cameras, a focus on community policing, expanded crisis intervention training, new de-escalation policies, artificial intelligence assisting our investigations, legislative reforms affecting arrest, sentencing, and evidence collection. Every one of these changes required leaders to guide employees through uncertainty. The ability to lead change has become one of the most valuable leadership skills in modern criminal justice. So how do we create a vision that people can follow? Because people are much more willing to embrace change when they understand its purpose. And that's why successful leaders begin with vision. They answer 3 important questions. Why are we making this change? What problem are we trying to solve? How will this benefit our employees and our community? When people understand the why, they're more likely to support the how. And with that, vision gives change meaning. We also want to make sure that we are communicating change effectively, because communication is especially important during periods of change. Employees don't expect leaders to have every answer immediately, but they do expect leaders to communicate honestly and consistently. They expect leaders to share information early, provide regular updates, answer questions, Acknowledge uncertainty when appropriate. Remember, if leaders don't communicate, that's when the rumor mills start. And silence almost always creates an unnecessary anxiety. Another important part of leadership and change is getting buy in. One of the most effective ways to reduce resistance is by involving employees in the process. Ask them for feedback, invite their suggestions, create opportunities for officers and staff to identify potential challenges before implementation. This doesn't mean every recommendation is going to be adopted, but it demonstrates that you have a respect for the people in the trenches doing the work. People are far more likely to support changes when they believe their voices have been heard. Not everyone will immediately support change, and that's okay. But how do you manage resistance? So good leaders don't label every critic as negative. Instead, they ask questions of the negative. Tell me, what concerns you and why? What challenges are you seeing with the new policy? Sometimes resistance reveals legitimate problems that leaders hadn't considered, and considering them makes you a stronger and better leader. Listening does not weaken your leadership abilities, it strengthens it. It builds trust among your team, and it gives you insight to things that you may not have thought of. So let's return to our earlier example. Your department is implementing body-worn cameras. As a supervisor, your job extends simply beyond giving the camera out. You have to provide training and explain the department policy. You need to answer questions about privacy and officer safety. And you want to address those concerns honestly. And when you see early success of these body-worn cameras, celebrate it and let everybody know. When leaders remain engaged throughout the implementation process, the employees gain confidence in both the technology and the leadership behind it. So another case study, the new report writing system. Imagine your department adopts a completely new report writing software system. Many younger officers adapt quickly. Some veteran officers become frustrated. They don't like change. And rather than criticizing them, an effective supervisor will provide additional training. They'll pair experienced employees with technology mentors and allow extra time for learning. Because the goal here isn't simply compliance with your order. The goal is for your employees to become confident. Because leaders succeed when their employees succeed. So how do we lead through reform? Some organizational changes are much larger than introducing equipment. Departments may implement community policing strategies. They may revise use of force policies. They may create co-responder mental health teams. A lot of departments have those nowadays. They may improve transparency through new reporting systems. These reforms often require cultural change, not just procedural change. And it's so important for you to note that changing culture takes patience. It also requires leaders who consistently reinforce new expectations through both their words and their actions. So how do we shape organizational culture? Culture is often described as the way we do things around here. And you've heard that saying, that's not what we do here, right? Every leader influences culture. Employees, they pay attention to what supervisors reward and what supervisors recognize and what they tolerate. If collaboration is rewarded, you're going to see collaboration grow. If innovation is encouraged, your employees are going to become more willing to share their ideas. If unethical shortcuts are ignored, though, they gradually become part of the culture and more routine for your employees to take. So leadership decisions, every leadership decision, shapes culture one decision at a time. So how do we empower our employees to lead change? Successful change isn't accomplished by one leader. It is accomplished by the entire organization. Great leaders empower employees to participate in the process. They delegate responsibility, they recognize achievements, and they celebrate progress. They develop future leaders who can continue improving the organization. Leadership isn't about controlling every decision. It is about building an organization capable of succeeding long after today's leaders have moved on. Now, when we're trying to establish organizational change, I want you to recognize that sometimes it fails, and that's because of avoidable leadership mistakes. Sometimes leaders, they collaborate and communicate too little. Others move so quickly that employees never understand the purpose behind the changes. Some ignore legitimate concerns. Others announce new initiatives but fail to follow through. So successful change requires consistency, and that is how you empower your employees to lead change, because employees must believe that leadership is committed for the long run. Here's a reflection exercise. Think about a significant organizational change that you have experienced. Perhaps it's getting a new boss. Maybe you got a new technology. Or if you haven't worked yet, maybe there's a new school policy, such as these video lectures. Maybe there's a new workplace procedure. Ask yourself, what made that transition successful or unsuccessful? The answer often has less to do with the change itself and more to do with how leaders manage the process. So again, I'm reinforcing people rarely resist change. That is the most important leadership lesson this week. Rather, people resist poorly managed change. When leaders communicate clearly, involved employees explain the purpose, and provide support, resistance often decreases dramatically. Leadership doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It helps people move through change. So how do we build long-term success? Successful organizational change, it's important to note, does not happen overnight. It requires vision, communication, training, trust, accountability, and patience. The strongest organizations understand that change is a continuous process and not a single event. Great leaders never stop learning, adapting, and improving. So, key takeaways from today. First, change is inevitable in every criminal justice organization. Second, resistance is a normal human response to uncertainty. Third, effective communication and employee involvement create commitment. Finally, great leaders don't simply manage change. They inspire people to believe in the future that they're building together. Okay, so we're at the end of this video. Throughout this week, we've explored leadership from many different perspectives. We've examined behaviors, leadership styles, contingency leadership, situational leadership, crisis leadership, ethical leadership, and leading organizational change. In our final video for week 2, we're going to bring all of these concepts together in one realistic supervisory scenario. You'll step into the role of a criminal justice supervisor and apply everything that you've learned to a series of leadership challenges that unfold during a single shift. It'll be a lot of fun. I'll see you in our next video.